This is intended to be a quick guide to writing a social science dissertation. Obviously, there's different ways of writing dissertations, but you might be at this stage, you might be late on in your writing your dissertation, you haven't done a right lot, you really need to get your head back in the game, or maybe you've written quite a bit and it's just all getting a bit foggy, you just want to get it organised. I'm a tutor and assessor for a BA in health and social care. So I mark social science dissertations. I've supervised of countless social science dissertations, so I have quite a bit of experience. So first thing to remember, now I know you've probably, before you even start writing, you've probably already got your research question in your head, and that's fine because you might have done a research proposal, you've probably done your homework, but you kind of just need to forget the research question. You don't mention the research question until halfway through. The whole dissertation pivots around this research question. Everything before the research question is building up to the research question. It's justifying it. So you shouldn't really be thinking about the research question, if that makes sense, until you state it after the literature review. Everything after the research question is in response to the research question. So it's about answering that research question. You might not have a research question, you might have a hypothesis, you might have aims and objectives. Either way, it's still all pivots around that. We do not mention the research question in the introduction. You might mention it in the abstract, but I haven't gone into the abstract on this section. I'm just going through the basic fundamental sections. So, introduction. What is the problem you're wanting to explore? So you can look at your research question a bit, think about, what's the main problem? Is it about mental health in adolescents? Is it about loneliness in elderly people? Is it about drug abuse in homeless people? What is the problem? So then you're going to write about the population. Who is this problem affecting? Find some statistics from the World Health Organization, from local statistics, from local sources. How prevalent is it? How many people are suffering with this issue? What is the issue that you want to fix or find out more about? And then why is it important the research be carried out in this area? So the introduction really is kind of like a short sort of punchy. You're just really trying to sell the dissertation to start with. You're just trying to introduce the topic. It's a bit like a shorter version of the literature review, really. It's just sort of selling the topic, the population. That's all. Not the question. We don't talk about the question yet, just the topic and the population. Then we get into the literature review. So this is an essay in its own right. Just actually pointing out these word counts are based on a 9,000 word dissertation, so yours might be slightly different, so you might need to adjust these word counts slightly, but that's what I'm basing on, a 9,000 word dissertation. So the literature review is an essay about the issue, the topic. You're going to find sources that support the need for your research, that you're not trying to answer the question. This is, again, one of the biggest problems I tend to find, particularly students doing secondary research. They try and answer the question in the literature review, so that's why it's really important to forget about the question here. You're just looking at the topic. So you're going to again look at the population, the target group, look at policies and theories that might relate to this particular issue in this target group. Look at government documents, that white papers have been published about this issue. And they should uncover some of the knowledge that you need to show your sort of the background information about the topic that you're going to research. Try and find some journal articles, that previous research on the topic. But again, you've got to be careful, because if you're doing secondary research, you don't want journal articles that are going to answer the question. You want journal articles which kind of just give the background about the topic and the population and other reliable sources, and discuss those sources just like you would in any essay. It's just generating that discourse, that discussion around these different sources, how they relate to the topic, how they inform the topic. But you've got to have an end goal in mind. The end goal for the literature review is to try and build a case for the need for the research to take place. So you might be finding gaps in the research, when you're looking through this, and ideally you'll be finding, well, actually, although we know about the topic from this perspective, actually we don't know about it from this perspective. This is building up that rationale, that justification for the research question you're about to ask. So we're starting to build up towards the research question here. And that's the idea of all this research above. It should be pointing out sort of like the need for this research question to be answered, the gap in research, the rationale, why it's important, the topic. So we're trying to build that case for the research to take place, and then we summarize the above, and then that summary should then lead directly into the research question. These summaries should make it imperative that this research question is answered. They should really sell the reason for this research question. So it should finish with something like, therefore it is imperative that, or it would be very useful to answer the following question, which is the research question. So that's where the research question should sit. Some guides, sometimes they'll put it right at the beginning of the methodology. That's fine, however perhaps your professors are wanting, your teachers and lecturers are wanting you to put it, but that's where I put it at the end of the literature review. So into the methodology, you may want to state some aims and objectives, but the aims and objectives shouldn't just be broad aims and objectives about what you're doing. They should be very much related to the research question. They should be just about what the point of really answering the question to that research question is. Really, it's not really about what you're going to do or anything like that. It's just about the research question. You don't necessarily need aims and objectives. They're not, if you've got a research question, but some people will just have aims and objectives, depends on, again, on the exact type of research you're doing. And obviously some of you will have a hypothesis if that's the approach that you've taken. So then the methodology, not the method, the methodology is discussing the different research paradigms, or these different ways of approaching and thinking about the data collection process and the idea of concepts of truth. Now, I'm not going to teach you about these. Hopefully you've got an idea, but a good place to start is, I quite like the research onion, and you work through the layers of the research onion. So if you Google the research onion, just work from the outside to the inside and just tackle each area. So you're just going to start off by explaining what is positive and what is interpretivism, and then which one have you picked, because which one is the most suitable for answering that question. And the same for realism, relativism. Now, the reason I've highlighted in bold these ones on the right is that the majority of my students doing social science research will choose interpretivism, relativism, inductive reasoning, qualitative data, and secondary. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're what you're going to choose, but that's where most of my students tend to fall in with their social science research. But really, it's just going through. I mean, in the basic, most simple form, you can have a paragraph for each one of these. What are the two different perspectives? Why have you chosen the perspective or the type of data collection that you've chosen? Why have you picked qualitative data? Why are you looking at qualitative data? Then the method, and again, this is where some students get mixed up. They think the methodology and the method is the same thing. Well, the method, it kind of is. It's part of the methodology section, but the method is just specifically how are you going to do your research? How exactly are you going to gather your data? Are you going to be searching databases? Are you going to be searching Google Scholar, PubMed? Are you going to be searching those databases, or are you going to be going out and collecting primary data from participants through questionnaires? What are you going to be doing? So just specifically, what are you going to be doing? And again, why is that the best way to do it for to answer your particular question? So again, everything should be responding to this question. Everything should be related to answering that research question. Then you should be including how you're going to analyze that data. So once you've collected together out of that data, what are you going to do? Are you going to do a thematic analysis? Are you going to be just presenting some of the statistics in charts and graphs? Are you going to be doing inferential tests? If you are, then you probably know what that means. If you're not, you might not know what that means. And then you need to cover ethics in the method section. So at the very least, I mean, this is what my students would put, that they have received ethical approval from UC Leeds Ethics Committee. But you need to say where you've gained your ethical approval from, and then explain any ethical issues that you might have found in there. But that's the absolute bare minimum. You need to state that you've gained ethical approval. I would expect a paragraph discussing the various ethical issues of your, is it beneficent for your population? Is it maleficent in any way? Is there any harm could come to anybody? The results section, 10 to 15,000 words, sorry, 10,000 to 1,500 words could be too much for your results section. If all your results section is presenting a few sort of sets of graphs, this section is very, very descriptive. There's no discussion included in the results section, so it might not be that many words. That's probably the top end. So present your results. So that could be the list of the secondary literature that you've found through your searches. It could be graphs and tables of primary data that you've collected. Might be your inferential tests. It could be your descriptive statistics, if that's appropriate for your research. And then a lot of people, that'll be it for the results section. Now, if you're doing a thematic analysis, I would expect in the results section a quick description of the themes that you found in the literature. And again, it's important to keep this descriptive. Don't be discussing those themes, just describe them. Where have you found them? Which particular articles have you found those themes in? Which particular, if you're doing like interviews with participants, how many of the participants mentioned that theme? Was it all of them? Was it a few of them? Was it 5 of them? How many of them actually mentioned that particular theme that that's come emerged from there? So then we get into the biggest bit. Again, everything's in response to the research question. The discussion starts with you might want to restate the research question, or the aims, objectives, or the hypothesis, and answer the research question. That's how your discussion should start. So really, any reader should be able to read that results section and answer the question themselves. So you're just really stating the obvious from that results section. If you can't answer the research question, that's fine. That you might think that's a problem. Not necessarily a problem, but that's going to come out in your discussion, because you're probably going to explain that perhaps the data you've collected hasn't actually answered the research question. Don't worry, don't panic about that. Don't feel like you've got to go back and redo it. That's fine. You just have to think about your methodology, and we can have some discussion around how you could have done things differently. So again, ideally, you can concisely answer the research question at the beginning of the discussion. Then you're going to start this essay discussing those findings. What are these themes? Discuss them. Give some examples from them. What do they mean? How do they inform? How do they answer your question? And then you might then want to think about how this information compares to the other sources. So some of these other sources you might have found back in the literature review. So look back at the theories and other sources, journal articles, things you find in literature review. Do they explain the themes? Do they explain the findings? Do they explain the patterns in the data that you've found? Then hopefully at this stage you'll be starting to sort of find solutions to the problem that you've initially set out to answer or to solve. Or you might be finding gaps in research. Where are the gaps in data? Why can't you answer certain parts of the question? Why can't you, is there more research that needs to be done to find, or maybe your approach wasn't quite appropriate for finding that those answers that you were looking for? Or are there any particular interesting perspectives about the problem that have emerged from the results? At this stage, I'd expect people to, this might go here, it could go at the end of the conclusion, depends. Again, you might have been advised to put it in different places, but you might want to discuss limitations of your study, or limitations of the data that you've found. So again, are there still gaps in the data? Are there still areas that we don't know enough about that need more research finding. Again, if you can't answer your research question up here, that's fine. Here we can really look at the where the gaps are in the data and what other research might need to be done. So what further research might need to be done, and there you can show off your understanding and methodology, because you can show us that you your method hasn't addressed the research question properly. So what methods would address the research questions more effectively? And you may or may not really here. I mean, this is quite a useful section, particularly for qualitative, interpretative type research. You might want to reflect on any biases that you've had. You know, it might be your personal experience that has caused, potentially influenced your decision making throughout this dissertation. The reader should become aware. You know, you need to make the reader aware of any potential biases that you've got. How did you mitigate those biases? How did you reduce those biases? You know, was that through discussions with your supervisor? Did they help you identify some biases and reduce those biases? And again, conclusion. Again, just answer the research question if you can. You know, again, you know, we've discussed that. If you can't answer the research question, state that you can't answer the research question. Then the way I tend to would see a conclusion, you're pulling out the main points from the discussion above, and you're sort of like pulling them in together into the, you know, mixing them up in the paragraphs, and hopefully that will start to generate some new points. You know, we call this like the synthesis from the data. It's the new ideas and new points. This is the new learning, the new knowledge, which really is the outcome of your conclusion. And again, these things should be either answering the research question or highlighting gaps or issues within the data and the previous or the research and things. You might want to include what impact it has on policy and practice. You know, what are the recommendations for that policy and practice? Can we find any better ways of working from your findings? Or does there need to be more research carried out, or new policies or new practice developed? So again, this is really important section, is the recommendations part. It's one of the probably most read parts of any piece of research. Again, when you were looking for your research gap, you probably went straight to the recommendations section in a lot of the journals articles that you looked at. And then what contribution has your work made in the area of research or industry? So what is the impact really of what you've done, or what's the potential impact? And this kind of links into this. How should your work be disseminated? Who are going to be the best people to read your work to inform their practice and their policy making and things? So that's it. I haven't included doing the abstracts or contents or acknowledgements or appendices. Obviously, refer back to your university guides for them. But this is just the fundamental, the core part of the actual dissertation, the bit really that carries all the marks. So hopefully you found this video useful.